At a certain age, life becomes quieter. Not suddenly, but gradually. Friends move away, families grow in different directions, conversations that once filled entire evenings become occasional check-ins, and for many older men, the house grows still. This quiet is often misunderstood. From the outside, living alone is quickly labeled as loneliness. But that assumption misses something important. Solitude and loneliness are not the same experience, even though they can look identical. Loneliness is the feeling of being unwanted, unseen, or disconnected. Solitude, on the other hand, is simply being alone, with space to think, reflect, and exist without performance. Many older men don't fear being alone. What they fear is being misunderstood in that aloneness. They are not withdrawing from life. They are adjusting to a different rhythm, one that values fewer words, fewer obligations, and more internal clarity. This chapter is not about glorifying isolation. It's about recognizing that quiet does not automatically mean emptiness. Sometimes it means a man has finally stopped filling space just to prove he belongs. There is a difference between being alone because life left you there and being alone because you chose to stay. For many older men, solitude is not a failure of connection. It is a deliberate narrowing of the world. Over time, you learn that not every relationship deserves access. Not every conversation is worth the energy it takes to maintain. Peace becomes more valuable than approval. This is often misread as emotional distance. In reality, it is discernment. Solitude becomes a way to protect what remains: attention, health, and time. It allows a man to live without constantly explaining himself, defending his choices, or performing versions of himself that no longer feel true. This choice does not come from bitterness, it comes from experience. After decades of responsibility, noise, and expectation, some men arrive at a simple realization. Presence matters more than proximity. Being alone, in this sense, is not about closing the door on others. It's about finally opening space for oneself. Modern life treats constant connection as a requirement. Messages arrive without pause, opinions are always available, presence is measured by responsiveness, and silence is often interpreted as absence, or worse, avoidance. For older men, this pressure can feel unnecessary. There is a point where constant communication stops adding value and starts creating fatigue, not because connection is bad, but because it becomes performative, maintained out of expectation rather than meaning. Solitude offers relief from this demand. Without the need to respond, explain, or engage on cue, a man can finally hear his own thoughts again. Decisions become clearer, emotions settle. Life slows to a pace that feels human. This is not withdrawal, it is regulation. Choosing fewer connections allows for deeper ones. It restores a sense of control over attention, a resource that becomes increasingly valuable with age. In a world that equates availability with worth, choosing silence can be an act of self-respect. Even when solitude is chosen, loneliness can still surface. Not because the choice was wrong, but because being human carries a need for recognition. Loneliness is not always about the absence of people. Often, it appears when a man feels invisible, when his experiences, skills, or inner life are no longer being acknowledged. As roles change with age, so does visibility. Careers slow or end, social status shifts, the world stops asking questions it once depended on the answers to. In those moments, solitude can feel heavier. This is where the difference matters. Loneliness seeks connection to escape discomfort. Solitude allows discomfort to be observed without panic. Older men who navigate this well do not deny loneliness when it arises. They notice it. They understand it as a signal, not a verdict. It becomes information, not identity. Recognizing this prevents a temporary feeling from becoming a permanent story about who they are. When life becomes quieter, something else emerges. Without constant noise, the mind reorganizes. Thoughts slow down. Patterns become visible. A man begins to notice what he was too busy to feel before. This is where solitude shows its value. In quiet, identity shifts away from roles and towards substance. There is less pressure to be impressive, useful, or agreeable. Decisions are no longer filtered through expectation. Creativity often returns here, not in loud ambition, but in steady curiosity. Reading becomes deeper. Walking becomes intentional. Even rest takes on meaning. This space also allows reconciliation with past choices, unfinished chapters, and unanswered questions, not to relive them, but to finally place them where they belong. Quiet does not erase regret or loss. It gives them proportion. For men who allow it, solitude becomes a workshop where clarity is built slowly without an audience. Fulfillment does not always arrive through accumulation. For many older men, it appears through subtraction. Fewer obligations, fewer explanations, fewer demands on attention. What once felt like loss slowly reveals itself as relief. Solitude, when understood, becomes a form of alignment. Life begins to match internal values rather than external expectations. Decisions are made with less urgency, but more certainty. This does not mean independence from others. It means independence from the need to be constantly affirmed or visible. A man no longer measures his worth by how often he is needed or noticed. Connection, when it happens, is cleaner. Conversations are chosen, not endured. Silence is shared without discomfort. Presence is genuine, not performed. What remains is not emptiness, but steadiness. A sense of self that no longer requires noise to feel real. Only enough quiet to recognize what still matters. In this way, living alone is not a retreat from life. It is a refined engagement with it, on quieter terms, but deeper ones.